Maybe you've already got a name for your podcast. If that's the case, then stick with me here because I might still have some things for you to think about. Now, good podcast names are short. Usually between 1 and 3 words tends to be good. Keeps them nice and memorable, makes the domain name short, and it makes the artwork a little bit easier to see and to put together as well. They're unambiguous, meaning if you take a word like here, or even there, those are 2 words that can be spelled, well, they sound the same, but you spell them differently and they mean very different things. So it's always good to try and avoid words like that. Also, words where you're sort of futzing around with the spelling, geeks, but with a Z at the end. It's not necessarily the kind of thing you want to do, simply because if you've done that just to secure a domain name, then it's probably best to think of something else, because you don't want to have to explain to people every time, it's called Podcast Corner, but with a K. You don't want to do that every time you're telling people about your show. They should sort of work on their own, really, and not rely on any past knowledge, anything like that, because your listener might not carry the same context that you have as to why your particular name is a good name. It might, trying to keep from using really in-depth industry terms that maybe people aren't aware of, that kind of thing. Now, think about the fact that your podcast name will influence, or should certainly influence, your domain name, which is how people will get to your podcast website, and also any social media handles that you might have. So some things to avoid then. Ending your podcast name with the word podcast, especially. As we discussed before in the artwork segment, every podcast in Apple Podcasts is a podcast. So we don't need to, if you think about how many TV shows can you think of, or how many films can you think of, or how many books can you think of that incorporate the name, like TV show, film, or book as at the end of their, title. You get it occasionally in some films. Obviously, you get like The Simpsons, the movie, and there is a world in which that sort of makes sense if you've got a larger brand. But I still think it's worth remembering that everything that people search for in a podcast app is a podcast. So you don't need to make that delineation. As I said, with the ambiguity, sort of try and avoid homonyms and deliberate misspellings. Avoid keyword stuffing. This might not occur to you, but I've been surprised in the years that I've been helping podcasters. You often see these podcast names with really long titles, and that's because they're trying desperately to claw some sort of search engine juice from either Google or from Apple Podcasts. And it's just, that juice isn't really worth the squeeze, because when people are subscribed to your podcast, they're not going to see it, and it's just a little bit gauche. Let's be honest, it's a little bit gauche having sort of several keywords at the end of the title of your podcast. Now, there is a line here, of course, with everything. I mean, for example, in my off days, I run a podcast about the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and that show is called, in Apple Podcasts, Beware of the Leopard, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy podcast. One of the best decisions I made, after quite a while, actually, to do that, because it then, of course, means that people are going to find the show by searching for Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which, some people actually do. Then if I don't, without that title, without that name in the title, it's not going to appear, because of the way Apple Podcasts search works. It's only searching on limited things. So yes, we want to avoid keyword stuffing, but if you have the opportunity to have a short subtitle, Beware of the Leopard, yes, it's sort of 4 words, but really only 2 are doing the heavy lifting there. And Beware of the Leopard. Again, I'm perhaps in this particular case not eating my own dog food, as it were, in that I am using a more obscure phrase, but it is right in the first chapter of the book, pretty much, and in the first episode of the radio series. I'm defending my podcast title. Anyway, you can see there is obviously a little bit of give and take here, but if you have room for a sort of short podcast name followed by a relatively short subtitle, then there's no harm in doing that. Just walk that line carefully, that's all. Don't call your podcast Real Talk. because it turns out there are several podcasts called Real Talk, and it's also a little bit sort of, sounds a little bit blowhardy, I think. So I would avoid it. And as I say, lots of podcasts, turns out, are called Real Talk. And then I would avoid the Your Name show title, unless, again, you're really famous, and I love you, but I doubt that you are if you're here. So that would be, it's not a hard and fast rule. Obviously, some people do it, but I tend to recommend against it, because unless people really know to search for you by name, you might be leaving some potentially useful keywords on the table. So here are, I think, some good podcast name examples. Code Switch. It's all about how certain people in society have to change the way they sort of change their rhetorical or their communication style when moving between contexts. It's a great title for that. Crime Town sort of does what it says on the tin, really, doesn't it? It's going to tell you about crime in a town. My Favourite Murder. It's a really enticing and obviously darkly humorous title. Reply All. That demonstrates it's going to be a show about the internet. The Guilty Feminist, I think, is a really fun and interesting one. And You're Wrong About, there's a stark title for you, isn't it? Now, here, in my humble opinion, are some not so good examples of podcast names. I am not commenting on the quality of the shows at all. We're literally just thinking about the name and the efficacy and the relevance of that name. So, number one, a Scottish podcast. This is a sci-fi comedy show. Yeah. It's quite funny, actually. But it's called A Scottish Podcast. I don't know how helpful that is to them. Happy Hour Podcast. Now, this one breaks, for me, a little bit of a rule. And I haven't put it as a piece of advice because it's kind of just a me thing. But, yes, it's ending with the word podcast. But it's doing that and not starting with the word the. That's really common for some reason. That's become a trend that people say, welcome to Happy Hour Podcast. I don't know why people don't say, welcome to the Happy Hour Podcast, because that is how words work. But that is simply a personal beef. And I'm sorry I brought it up. The Agenda with host name. Again, we're just not giving us any information there. Yes, we get a sense that it's probably going to be sort of quite hardline and opinionated, but other than that, we don't really know what's going on. Unfiltered. That's there's a chap here in the UK called James O'Brien who has a show called Unfiltered, and I think that's fine. But again, it may be promising things that perhaps a show with that name isn't always delivering, and in that case, that is very much the case. It's just an interview show. So, if you are going to go big with a name like Unfiltered, you sort of want to be able to back that up, I think. And this one, WFTYW question mark exclamation mark. That's a real podcast name. I don't, So let's think about putting your own name to work here. First thing you might want to think about is a domain name. Either way, at some point you do need to think about this because you need to make sure that you can point people to a website that you own, and we will talk about that at a later stage. But start with that domain name. Try and make it easy to type. It's okay if it's long. Give you an example. The Naked Art of Living is a podcast that I helped get off the ground with Anna Kolak, and the domain name is thenakedartofliving.com, which is quite long, but it's really easy to type. Those words are unambiguous, and while it does take a minute, you're not having to do a lot of heavy lifting there. She hasn't had to think about something more clever, TNAOL or whatever. She's just gone, no, let's keep it nice and simple. And so don't be afraid to go a little bit long with your domain name if you're just using real words, because you've got to be able to say these words out loud every week. when you're putting out your episode. So think about that. Also, think about a Gmail address. Definitely get one. I mean, you can get an email address at your domain name, but it's much easier and free to set up a Gmail account. And I would, if you can, match the Gmail username to your domain name. So it's always great if you can get whatever your domain name is without the .com part at gmail.com. Again, because it just makes it easy for you to say and for people to remember. AnswerMeThisPodcast.com. So Answer Me This was a long-running show, finished in 2021, I believe, and they had AnswerMeThisPodcast.com, and I think it was AnswerMeThisPodcast@gmail.com. Nice and easy to remember. Again, social media handles. Now, you might be a little bit more restricted here in terms of character length. Twitter, especially, is quite mean in the length it gives you for usernames. So bear that in mind and start to think about all these things together and figure out how they all sort of interact. Quick example, my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy show, we just decided to go for BTL Podcast across the board. So everything is BTL Podcast. So btlpodcast.com. Feedback at btlpodcast.com. And the social media handles are BTL Podcast. So yeah, you want to be thinking about Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as well. Try and get a Facebook page set up with your with that handle as well, because that means you can just point people. Again, when you're saying it out loud, you can just say facebook.com/BTL podcast, for example. So a little bit of homework for you then. Brainstorm some potential name ideas if you haven't got them already. And then search your podcast app. Start with definitely use Apple Podcasts and Spotify would be my suggestion. But if you use another app, have a little search around there as well, because they may use their own directory, and see what comes up when you type those particular when you type some of those names that you're brainstorming. And then check namechecker.com. That will really help you figure out all of your social media handles, domain names. It will kind of give you a really good sense of what is available and help you sign up and get those names, get those social media handles all nicely sewn up and under your control. Ask friends and family members and co-workers, like, what do you think about this name? Is it a good name? It's never a bad idea to just ask around and see what people think. Does it spark anything for them, And then buy a domain name. I recommend iwantmyname.com. I just find it a simple and uncluttered experience. And there are lots of places you can buy domain names from, and maybe you'll use the place that you already use. But I tend to recommend I Want My Name because of the fact that it's just really simple and there's no extra upsell. They're not going to try and tack anything else on at an extra cost. So with all that done then, we will meet back here shortly, and we'll talk about media and website hosting.